The Overwatch 2 is bad horse has been beaten so hard right now that it's basically fossilized. But this isn't about the low-hanging fruit that is often talked about. The monetization, the removal of social features, the game being a pathetic excuse for a sequel. You already know that, and I'm not here to insult your intelligence. We're talking about the parts of the game that nobody is talking about. The general gameplay, the map design, the modes, the identity, the balance, the absolutely moronic push to make Overwatch an esport. Everyone keeps saying the core gameplay is at least good, but when put under scrutiny, is that really the case? To find out, let's look at it piece by piece. Let's begin on a more positive note. The most important part of any first-person shooter is the weapons. If your guns don't feel satisfying to shoot people with, then you're not going to have a good game. So, how are Overwatch's guns? Pretty good. A lot of Overwatch's weapons are based on historically good games like Quake, Half-Life, and Team Fortress 2. The guns function well, they sound good, and they generally have a unique look thanks to the great character design. Another thing I like is there are a good amount of weapons that have alternate firing modes, like McCree's revolver and Symmetra's microwave beam. It's an underrated feature that needs to come back, and how fun it is to shoot in this game is a testament to that. There are some weapons I dislike, like Moira's Biotic Grasp and Doomfist's hand cannon, which is nowhere near as impactful as your typical hand cannon, but other than that, it's pretty solid. Let's talk about another essential element of any first-person shooter, moving. The movement in Overwatch is pretty mediocre. The movement mostly comes down to press a button and move in a direction. This is fine on its own. I thoroughly enjoyed Neon White, which has a similar movement system. However, it has none of the things that make Neon White actually fun to move in. It doesn't have good level design to enable movement, but we'll get to that later. There is no real flow, as most of the heroes only have a single movement ability that can't be chained. There isn't much challenge with the movement, as there's no external techniques to boost them. If they exist, Blizzard will just patch them. There is some interaction, but it's pretty basic and doesn't have too much utility besides charge into the enemy to do some damage. There are some exceptions, of course. Chaining dash kills as Genji does have some nice flow. Wrecking Ball rewards learning the movement system, and Lucio has the best movement in the game, as the maps have lots of walls for you to run on. There's a nice sense of flow, and you can do some crazy rollouts if you're good. Speaking of the heroes, hero design in Overwatch follows three main categories in tank, DPS, and support. DPS is a typical damage class, usually with damaging abilities, a mobility tool, a Gale free card, or a combination of the three. Supports are pretty basic, as they are healers, and only healers with damage being to heal, defend themselves, or escape. And tanks are massive frontline classes that have damage absorption abilities and stun/displacement. A final universal design is the heroes are designed around counter picking. If the enemy Junkrat's giving you a hard time, Pharah flies out of his range. If the enemy Widowmaker really needs to die, go Genji. If the enemy Lucio is getting a bit unkillable, Sombra can help bring him down. This is good in the way that it makes the game a lot more accessible, but also it's not too healthy for the meta. If countering becomes too much of a factor, then the game comes down to a team building simulator with the actual mechanics being an afterthought. Unfortunately, most of the time this isn't the case in the meta. I was mainly talking about countering in the context of Overwatch 1, because in Overwatch 2, the meta becomes entirely centered around the tanks. Due to their incredible power, it is only really worth to counter the tanks, as if the tank cannot function, the rest of the team will fall. Aside from the countering problem, there's another main issue with the hero design. A lot of them are just really annoying to combat. A good game will have weapons that are fun to shoot and be shot by. Overwatch has a lot of stuns, one-shots, and easy escape tool, which is the unholy trilogy of being unfun to fight. And considering many of the abilities will need specific characters to counter, this, along with the aforementioned counterplay-focused gameplay, means that the gameplay being fun depends on if your team is good or not. And seeing how solo queue usually turns out, yeah, having fun is a rare occurrence. One final con occurrence that most Overwatch heroes are built to do one main thing and one thing only. There is no playstyle variance, as you can only play a hero how it was intended. If you find options that enable alternative playstyles, Blizzard will patch them out. This once again hurts player expression, but there's one more specific thing that I'd like to cover in terms of hero design: the ultimates. Ultimates have always been overtuned in Overwatch. The system itself to get it is good, as it rewards active play and not dying, but the ults are too powerful for how they are not able to be tracked. They can't be countered because of only specific heroes and with proper coordination further gutting individual play. Another thing that adds on to this problem is the passive retaining 25% ult charge on switching. This further causes switching to be even more powerful, and once again, changes the player fervor to their team. I'm sure you're seeing a pattern here. Nearly every system in Overwatch robs any individuality from the player. Granted, a team-centric design is not the problem. Halo 3 and Left 4 Dead 2 are great games for a reason. However, Overwatch goes at it to a point that playing solo queue is a horrific experience, and one bad teammate on either side will cause a horrible steamroll. And this situation is not only common, but expected. But enough discussing the heroes, let's talk about the environment you play in. Good level design in games should really bring out the best a game has to offer, and this applies especially in multiplayer games. Whether it be the twisting, futuristic arenas of Halo or the dusty bomb sites of Counter-Strike, the map makes the match most of the time. Which is why Overwatch's boring map design really brings down the gameplay. The mobility of the Overwatch cast is disserviced by the utter lack of any verticality. The maps are dominated by choke points with barely usable flanks, and every map just plays the same and has similar looks. With the crazy futuristic setting Overwatch has, you'd think we get as cool maps as we have in classic Halo or Quake, but instead we get boring cities over and over again with the same cookie-cutter frameworks with barely any identity. And don't give me the game needs to be competitive argument, because even if we are to assume that it's in Overwatch's best interest to force it to become a competitive game, which it isn't, past games like Counter-Strike and Halo have made maps with varying themes and general geometries without needing to compromise the competitive scene. And don't even get me started on push. Besides the general flaws of the game mode, which we'll get to later, Blizzard looked at another mode in the game as well. The main inspirations for Overwatch that involves two teams pushing an object towards an objective, saw their compact map design and said, "To heck with that, we need more boring one-lane maps," and proceeded to make actual war crimes against level design. There's probably a Morbius joke I could have made there. Not only are push maps boring as tar, but Blizzard decided to make them as spread out as possible. I mean, like, going back to objective is like playing Death Stranding, but without the actual challenge of going somewhere. And while we're on the topic of push might be one of the worst game modes in any quote-unquote competitive game. But to explain that, we must back up a bit. In Overwatch 1, there were 3 main game modes, 4 if you're going to be a nerd: Escort, King of the Hill, and Assault. All of these games are ripped from TF2, with an Escort and Koth working well, but Assault is historically bad. It's always been either 2 defender or attacker side, so you're never going to get a good balanced game, even with the terrible matchmaking. In Overwatch 2, Assault is out of the matchmaking queue, with push taking its place. Conceptually, I like it. You control a robot that pushes a barricade, and whoever gets more ground ends up winning. It's a nice symmetrical game mode that is a lot more dynamic, but in practice, it's just awful. 99 times out of 100, the beginning teamfight is the only one that matters, due to how much the robot needs to push back in order to push your barricade after beating the enemy while you're at an advantage, and how the robot pauses if one member of the enemy team is on. The game heavily favors the already advantaged team. Combine that with some of the snowballing nature of Overwatch in general that we discussed, and being forced to do the Bed of Chaos boss run back every time you die, this means that if you lost the first team fight, you might as well no longer try, and it's fitting because playing Overwatch is just as fun as fighting the Bed of Chaos. I'm sorry. We'll move on. One of the main goals of balancing is to make it so that there's a reason to continue playing after the first encounter, and push fails as basic requirement, but the problems with Overwatch extend further beyond core gameplay. Balance also comes to mind as a core issue. Overwatch's balance has always been garbage, but you knew that. So let's break down some of the things that are downright nonsensical about the balance. Let's see here. Buffing characters are overpowered, nerfing characters are underpowered, nerfing fanfare characters to the ground while ignoring the main problems in the meta, nerfing everything about a character except the actual problem, giving nothing buffs to characters that desperately need them, and yeah, that sums it up nicely. Also, one final concept about Overwatch's balance is a tendency to overcorrect. Look no further than Doom for an example of this. Yeesh. But there's one final problem with the balance, and it extends to the presentation of the game itself. In terms of identity, Overwatch has been losing a lot of it over the years. From unique systems like being on fire and ends cards to the direct progression, Overwatch has been always trying to blend in with everyone else. Let's take a look at some reworks and balance changes. Bastion has always been a weird spot balance-wise. He had the ability to make himself immobile and gun people down, which made him always going to be tricky to nail down balance-wise. However, this was integral to his identity and made him iconic. But they wanted him to be more violent, so they turned his turret form to cool him and also made him move too, and they removed his self-heal and replaced it with a generic grenade. You'd think that the severe gutting of his identity would get him out of this balance loop, but you already know how bad Overwatch's balance team is. This repeats again with Doomfist, whose main identity is busting fat combos with abilities and punching enemies really hard. And stop me if you've heard this one, but they removed the combos and made the punch way weaker. And if you thought Bastion's balance was messy, just wait until you see the roller coaster James has been on. One final example is Mei, whose main ability is to free. You get the idea, okay? They really like removing that reason the character was unique. The exception to this is Orisa, who initially had as much identity as a cardboard box, but now has a pretty cool brawler identity. However, this trend of sacrificing identity for balance isn't stopping, as is the case with Roadhog. And this usually results in a game just sacrificing identity for nothing, due to fruitless efforts of perfect balance. But this is a symptom of another part of the game that infects every part of it, the hyper-focus on trying to be competitive. Overwatch's attempt to try to make it more of an esport have only hurt the game. I have already listed the above balance changes that have hurt the identity, but there are more pressing issues. For one, role queue. Role queue was made due to atrocious GOATS meta, where 3 tanks and 3 heroes was the dominant team for an entire year, where balance crises in other games only took a few days to solve. Role queue generally hurts a more casual environment, and the Overwatch team have been taking steps to improve open queue through separate tank balancing for non-role queues, which is commendable, by the way. Another thing to note is that Brigitte, the hero that resulted in said GOATS competition, was a direct response to the professional scene complaining about dive. Really shows to be careful what you wish for. Also, as previously mentioned, the map design has become very uninteresting to try to make it completely fair for competitive play. This is also a massive misunderstanding, as older competitive titles such as Quake and Halo would have interesting map design, with maps like Midship, Lockout, and Guardian. Once more, the freedom of identity being sacrificed for balance continues. One final effect is that this focus has poisoned something bigger than Overwatch itself, the community. I would rather cut off my left hand like I'm Godrick the Grafted than be trapped in a room with an average Overwatch player for 5 minutes. When most of the interactions with the community involve flaming or blaming another teammate, you know you're stuck with a bunch of horrible people. But you already knew that. Something a bit more controversial to say is that streamers are also part of the problem to a certain extent. They constantly reinforce a culture of pros being the most important part of the game, which is disgusting, borderline celebrity worship from individuals that will shill out Blizzard whenever they give them bonuses. When all the Overwatch creators were shilling out Overwatch 2 in the monetization, some people may have, but I don't because nobody catches me lacking. Maybe instead of looking at 1% of the player base, we should actually try to make the experience best for the core player base. And that's not me either, because I'm either so disconnected from the interest of the majority of the fan base, or they are all masochists. Then again, this game is partially bonus, so the second part is the more likely one. And for all of those who hate the game but can't stop playing, try swearing off the game for a month or so. It worked for me when I broke free from the clutches of Valorant. It's clear now that I really don't like Overwatch, but what makes my distaste for the game stick out even more for me is that there was a good game somewhere within it. There are genuinely good ideas and mechanics, but a lot of them are executed poorly or not capitalized on. While playing bad game will just be a sour experience and that's that, a game that's close to being a good game but you can't get there is so much more disappointing. And we all know defeat is so much more painful when you are so close to victory. The worst part is the game will probably continue to be more generic instead of reaching into itself and using its best parts to its fullest, due to the previously discussed balance philosophy. I think the best way to sum it up is by the Stunky quote.
Overwatch 2 isn't the worst game I've played this year, but it's definitely the most disappointing. But still better than Valorant.